My hands shook as I gripped the polished test tube stand. Years wasted, dedicated, surrendered, all boiled down to this moment. Sweat coated my fingers, my heart hammered against my ribs as I stared. Inside that gleaming cylinder, I had sown the seeds of a revolution, a biological rebellion against the limits we thought nature had cast. I was Dr. Emilia Santos, bioengineer and, admittedly, a bit of a genetic maverick. Some called me obsessed, others a visionary. Me? I felt like a woman clinging to sanity by threadbare fingernails as I toiled alone in a secluded lab far too advanced for a single mind and a meager grant. But I believed. Stubbornness was my true doctoral thesis. For too long we'd accepted the whims of heredity as some cosmic lottery. Tall parents, tall children. Brown eyes, and then the jarring anomaly of a blue-eyed outlier. Conditions passed down through generations, an inescapable curse or a lucky blessing. Yet, within those tiny strands of DNA, I saw not fate, but potential, a code begging for an architect bold enough to rewrite it. The early failures would have broken a lesser spirit. Cellular cultures collapsing, genetic sequences twisting into monstrosities. My colleagues scoffed, whispering of playing God, of the slippery slope leading to. Well, they preferred not to think too deeply about it. The ethics board threatened to shut me down more times than I could count, yet they couldn't deny the trickle of minuscule successes. A mouse with luminescent fur, a zebrafish with double the lifespan, a tadpole that regrew a severed limb. I was Frankenstein with a PhD, except my monster wasn't meant to instill horror, but hope. My breakthrough came with the hydras, those minuscule freshwater creatures with their mythical ability to regenerate. Hydra cells held the key, a sort of biological reset button I'd sought for years. The moment I found the pathway to induce that regenerative state in other organisms, in more complex tissue, well, it felt less like science and more like I'd unlocked a forbidden spell from an ancient grimoire. The next step was simultaneously the most exhilarating and terrifying of my life. I'd never worked with mammalian tissues, let alone human. Obtaining samples was a logistical nightmare, rife with moral dilemmas I spent far too many sleepless nights agonizing over. But when I held that first fragment of donated skin tissue, it wasn't with the detached curiosity of a scientist, but the trembling reverence of a sculptor handed the finest clay. The lab became my world. I existed on caffeine fumes and takeout noodles, barely aware of the sun rising or setting outside. My failures were spectacular, tissue masses blooming uncontrollably, malformed structures that were a gruesome mockery of their intended shapes. Yet, beneath them, was always a flicker of progress. A heartbeat where there should be none, a twitch of muscle in an isolated limb. I charted every microscopic triumph, every infinitesimal error, mapping the genetic labyrinth, paving a road to the future. Then came the day I stared at an ultrasound monitor in disbelief. There, nestled in an artificial womb I'd cobbled together from repurposed dialysis machines and enough biotubing to make a plumber weep, pulsed a nascent heart. An echo of human form, impossibly small and utterly perfect, grown from a tapestry of precisely modified cells. It had taken months of painstaking trial and error, genetic harmonies fine-tuned down to the nucleotide. A face swam into focus, the delicate curve of an ear, the minute bulge of an eyelid. I remember the sob that tore from my throat, a mix of horrified awe and an exhilaration so pure, it bordered on madness. My colleagues, when I finally, and reluctantly, unveiled my creation, were stunned into silence. The ethics board erupted. Religious groups rallied angrily outside the lab, waving signs emblazoned with slogans proclaiming me a heretic. The government predictably swooped in, buzzing with potential military applications, with promises of funding and threats of secrecy tangled in equal measure. My face was splashed across news headlines, labels ranging from medical pioneer to mad scientist flung at me with equal abandon. The world suddenly cared very much what Dr. Emilia Santos had been tinkering with in her hidden lab. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the shouting turned into muted whispers behind closed doors, there was only me and the soft glow of the life support systems. I'd watched that minuscule human form develop, first the flutter of movement, then the uncoordinated flailing of limbs testing their strength. It looked like any other fetus, unremarkable if you ignored the context. Yet, this wasn't merely the product of random conception, it was a calculated design. I knew what I held in my hands was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a Pandora's box, brimming with hope and horror in equal measure. Because while I'd focused on the potential good, eliminating hereditary diseases, growing replacement organs, pushing the boundaries of human longevity, it was naive to think others wouldn't fixate on a different application. Custom-built humans. My vision had been simple, at least initially. A world where parents wouldn't have to fear passing down debilitating conditions, where an unlucky genetic predisposition wouldn't chain their child to a lifetime of suffering. But how long would it be before those tweaks strayed beyond medical necessity? Tall, athletic children for parents obsessed with sports. Gene-edited eyes in colors nature never intended. Enhanced intelligence. Enhanced reflexes. Would the chasm between the haves and have-nots become a biological one, permanently cemented into our very DNA? They offered me the world, those men in their tailored suits. Imagine the possibilities, Dr. Santos. Revolutionizing human health, conquering aging, the economic impact alone. They used buzzwords like advancement and innovation, never once daring to utter the implications hanging unspoken in the air. Designer babies. A super race. My stomach churned every time I imagined my creation warped into that purpose. Yet, I'd opened that damned box, hadn't I? The knowledge was out there, a corrupted genie that could never be forced back into its lamp. The best I could hope for, perhaps, was to steer the narrative as much as a lone scientist ever could. Advocate for oversight, stringent ethical boundaries, transparency. But history had a bitter chuckle, reminding me how easily good intentions could pave the road to very unpleasant destinations. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and agonizing uncertainty. The fetus, now designated Subject 1, thrived in its artificial womb. Growth charts filled my lab walls, documenting the steady development of bones, organs, and a nervous system that flickered to life with increasing complexity. Yet, every milestone was a double-edged sword. A healthy heartbeat meant progress, but also the reality of a life I'd brought into being with no clear path ahead. The question of parenthood loomed large. Surrogates were swiftly dismissed, the ethical implications were a minefield I wasn't prepared to navigate. Yet, the thought of Subject 1 existing solely within the sterile confines of my lab felt equally disturbing. He, for I'd arbitrarily assigned a gender based on early scans, needed a human touch, a connection that transcended the sterile efficiency of biotubes and blinking monitors. But who? Could I trust anyone with this secret, this fragile spark of manipulated life? My nights were haunted by visions. A future where Subject 1, now a man, stood bewildered amidst a world vastly different from the one his artificial womb had simulated. What would his social interactions be like? Would he be ostracized, revered, or worse, commoditized? Then there were the biological unknowns. My modifications focused on health and longevity, but how would these interact with natural human DNA? If, in the future, Subject 1 were to have children of his own, what genetic oddities would their offspring inherit? Were we venturing into uncharted territory, each step a gamble with the very building blocks of life? The answer, it seemed, lay in observation. Subject 1's development inside the artificial womb offered a unique window into human gestation, a chance to study the intricate dance of cell division and organ formation in a way never before possible. I monitored neural pathways forming, the intricate dance of hormones, the development of senses, all through the sterile lens of a dozen high-definition cameras. It was a voyeuristic act, a scientific intrusion into the most sacred of human experiences, and yet, it was the only way I could glean some understanding of what I'd created. One day, a routine scan threw a wrench into my carefully constructed plans. An anomaly, a flicker on the otherwise pristine genetic map. It was minuscule, a single misplaced nucleotide, yet its implications sent a jolt of fear through me. A mutation. Had my meddling tampered with the very essence of Subject 1's DNA, creating an unforeseen glitch in his genetic code? Days turned into weeks as I meticulously analyzed the anomaly. To my immense relief, it didn't appear to be detrimental. In fact, it seemed to be a slight enhancement, a strengthening of a specific gene associated with immunity. A lucky accident, perhaps, a testament to the inherent resilience of life itself. But it served as a stark reminder of the precarious dance I was engaged in. One wrong step, one miscalculated modification, and the consequences could be catastrophic. The pressure was immense. The world outside continued to clamor for a glimpse of my creation, for details of the technology. Government agencies buzzed like hungry flies, their offers veiled threats. Meanwhile, Subject 1 grew, oblivious to the storm brewing around his existence. His tiny hand, captured on a monitor, curled into a fist, a gesture both ordinary and profoundly significant. It was a human movement, a spark of life blooming within a machine, and the weight of its implications threatened to crush me. I knew then that I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone who understood the scientific significance of my work, but also shared the ethical concerns that gnawed at me. Someone who wouldn't see Subject 1 as a lab rat or a weapon, but as a potential, a fragile hope for a better future. But where would I find such a person? And would they be willing to take this incredible, terrifying leap with me? My search for an ally felt more like a desperate gamble than a strategic decision. I knew, in the end, I'd likely have to face the consequences of my actions alone, yet the isolation had become suffocating. I needed a sounding board, a voice of reason to counter the frantic echoes of my own thoughts. My first instinct was to reach out to a former colleague, Dr. Elias Bouchard. Elias was a brilliant geneticist, but more importantly, he shared my concern about the potential misuse of our field. His ethical compass had always been unwavering, even if it had cost him career advancement and the respect of more ambitious peers. The problem was, Elias had disappeared from academia years ago, a self-imposed exile after a controversial research project had been shut down. Rumors swirled about government interference, corporate sabotage, nothing concrete, yet it hinted at a man who'd seen the dark side of scientific progress and retreated from the fray. Tracking him down was an exercise in old-fashioned detective work. I followed a trail of cryptic emails, obscure academic publications, and eventually, a remote cabin nestled deep in a redwood forest. When he opened the door, Elias looked more hermit than scientist, with unkempt hair, a bushy beard, and the guarded eyes of someone used to being hunted. He listened to my story without interruption. I poured out the years of secret research, the breakthrough with Subject 1, my mounting ethical anxieties, my need for a collaborator he likely knew I wouldn't get. When I finally finished, the cabin was heavy with silence, broken only by the insistent chirping of crickets outside. "You've done the impossible, Emilia," he said, his voice rough and a touch incredulous. "And now you stand at the precipice of the unimaginable." The relief of finally sharing my burden almost overwhelmed the trepidation twisting in my gut. "I can't raise him alone, Elias. I need help navigating this new frontier we've stumbled upon." He sighed, a long, weary exhale. "And do you truly believe there's such a thing as safe navigation in these waters? Even if we raise this child to be intelligent, compassionate, what happens then? He's not just an experiment, Emilia. He's a person, with all the complexities that entails. And he'll be the first of his kind, a living testament to our hubris." His words echoed my own nightmares. Yet Subject 1 was not a theoretical dilemma, he was a tiny being growing stronger with each passing day. Abandoning him felt like a betrayal I couldn't live with. "We limit his exposure," I suggested, my voice filled with a desperate hope I didn't entirely feel. "We raise him here, with you and me. He'll be safe, protected, and he'll have the guidance he needs to understand. Well, everything." Elias gave me a long, searching look. "And what happens when that protection fails, Emilia? When the world, inevitably, discovers your secret? Will you have prepared him? Or will he shatter on the rocks of a reality he was never built to withstand?" Another wave of nausea washed over me. Had I condemned this child before he'd even taken his first breath? Could I engineer him to be strong enough, resilient enough, to survive the onslaught of scrutiny, fear, perhaps even hatred, the world would undoubtedly heap upon him? "There's another question," Elias said quietly. "Perhaps the most important. Even if you succeed, Emilia, even if Subject 1 thrives under this unconventional upbringing, what have you unleashed? You've rewritten the rules of creation. Where does it end? Who decides what is acceptable and what isn't?" His words hung heavy in the air, a chilling condemnation of my actions. I wanted to argue, to defend the purity of my intentions, my hope for the future. But his questions stabbed at the heart of the terrifying responsibility I'd assumed, a burden no single person was ever meant to carry alone. The drive back to the lab was a blur. Elias' words echoed in my mind, each question a hammer blow to my already fractured sense of control. We'd argued, of course. His pessimism clashed with my dwindling optimism, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Yet, beneath it all, there was an unspoken agreement. We were in this together, for better or worse. The sterile efficiency of the lab greeted us with an unsettling coldness. The air filtration system hummed, the monitors glowed their usual green, but an unnatural silence hung in the air. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I rushed towards Subject 1's incubation chamber. "No," I whispered, the word a ragged gasp as I stared at the empty cradle. The biotubing lay limp and deflated, a discarded snakeskin on the gleaming metal platform. Subject 1, my creation, my responsibility, my hope, was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun towards Elias, eyes wide with a terror that transcended the immediate situation. "He's gone. Someone. They took him." Elias, however, seemed more stunned than panicked. He scanned the room with a practiced eye, taking in the overturned equipment, the shattered glass vials littering the floor, the scorch marks marring the wall. This wasn't a simple theft, Emilia, he said, his voice low and grim. This was a deliberate attack. Someone knew what they were doing, and they came prepared. The weight of his words crashed down on me. This wasn't some opportunistic break-in, it was a calculated strike, a surgical removal of Subject 1. The question now was who, and more importantly, why? The answer, it seemed, lay in the remnants of the destruction. A scorched data pad, its screen cracked and flickering. With trembling fingers, I accessed the logs, my stomach churning with dread as I saw the final entry. A single word, scrawled in a language I didn't recognize, before the system abruptly shut down. What does it say? Elias asked, his voice laced with a newfound urgency. I don't know, I admitted, frustration mingling with fear. It's not any language I've ever seen before. Then, another horrifying detail struck me. The security feeds, gone. Wiped clean, not a single frame of the abduction captured. They'd planned for this, whoever they were, meticulous in their execution. A cold rage simmered within me. My lab, my sanctuary, violated. Subject 1, a helpless child, ripped away from the only life he'd ever known. But beneath the anger, a sliver of fear wormed its way in. Who were these people? And what did they intend to do with my creation? Elias, ever the pragmatist, pulled me away from the flickering data pad. We need to regroup, Emilia. Think. Who knew about your research? Anyone outside this lab? I ran through a mental list of colleagues, disgruntled funding agencies, disgruntled former colleagues. The list was depressingly long. Yet, none of them possessed the sophistication to pull off such a meticulous operation. The answer, if it existed, lay in the mysterious symbol on the data pad, a cryptic calling card from the shadows. We were left with more questions than answers. The world we'd known, the controlled environment of the lab, had been shattered. The hunt for Subject 1, a desperate search for a stolen child, a scientific marvel, or perhaps even a weapon, had just begun. And we, the architects of this clandestine existence, were caught in the crossfire, unsure of who to trust, where to turn, or if we'd ever see the child we'd brought into this precarious world alive again. The destroyed lab resembled a battlefield, a testament to the efficiency and brutality of the attackers. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a relentless torrent of questions that gnawed at our sanity. Who were they? Why take Subject 1 but obliterate my research? Was it a rival scientist hungry for the glory of this breakthrough, or something more sinister, a shadowy organization with a darker agenda? Elias, ever the methodical thinker, suggested a logical first step. The data pad. We scavenged through the lab's wreckage, salvaging the scorched device. A local tech whiz, a friend of Elias with questionable morals but undeniable skill, managed to salvage the fragmented data. It wasn't much, a single, corrupted file with the same cryptic symbol. Frustratingly, even the tech whiz, who usually reveled in cracking impossible codes, was stumped. The symbol seemed to defy known languages and coding systems, an alien script hinting at a level of sophistication far beyond anything we'd anticipated. Days bled into weeks, the silence of the empty incubation chamber a constant reminder of our loss. The initial media frenzy over the missing scientist had died down, replaced by more pressing headlines. But we knew the chase was far from over. Whispers within the scientific community confirmed our suspicions. The attack wasn't an isolated incident. A rash of similar break-ins had plagued research labs across the globe, each targeting cutting-edge genetic research. The stolen data, however, remained a mystery. None of the victims reported the loss of any living subjects, unlike Subject 1. This discrepancy only deepened our confusion. Why target a lone researcher like me, especially if they weren't interested in the finished product, the engineered child? One night, as we sifted through the salvaged data fragments, a flicker of recognition sparked in Elias' eyes. He unearthed a reference, an obscure academic paper from decades ago, a fringe theory about a hidden society obsessed with human evolution, a group rumored to possess technology far surpassing anything publicly known. The paper had been ridiculed then, dismissed as the ramblings of a delusional scientist. But now, in the cold light of our predicament, it took on a terrifying new relevance. They call themselves the Aegis, Elias said, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and grim fascination. Supposedly, they operate in the shadows, manipulating human progress from behind the scenes, ensuring our evolution follows a path they deem beneficial. The idea of a clandestine organization controlling humanity's fate sounded outlandish, yet the evidence, however circumstantial, was stacking up. Could the Aegis be behind the attacks, seeing Subject 1 as a potential threat to their unseen agenda? And if so, what did they plan to do with him? Suddenly, the destruction of the lab took on a new meaning. Perhaps the attackers weren't interested in the data itself, but in preventing it from falling into the wrong hands, specifically, the hands of others who might exploit this technology for their own gain. It was a chilling thought, a shadowy organization playing puppet master, manipulating events from afar. But if true, it offered a sliver of hope. Maybe Subject 1 wasn't in danger, not exactly. Maybe he was a pawn in a much larger game, a game whose rules we didn't even begin to understand. The hunt for Subject 1 had taken an unexpected turn. We were no longer just chasing a stolen child, but venturing into a hidden world, a world where the lines between science and conspiracy blurred. And as we delved deeper, an even more unsettling question arose: who were the real villains in this story? Was it the Aegis, with their perceived control over humanity's future? Or was it us, the scientists who dared tamper with the very building blocks of life, unleashing forces we could never hope to contain?